Good morning. My name is Karen Peck, and I serve as a trustee here at DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. I am the trustee of stewardship, which means I oversee pledging, the auction, and our endowment fund. We want to welcome everyone to our open and inclusive community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another as we each explore these paths. First time and returning visitors, it is our custom to invite you to stand and give your name and where you are from, if you feel comfortable doing so. Are there any visitors who would like to introduce themselves?
My name is Tierney. I'm from Batavia.
Welcome. Thank you. Oh, yes.
My name is Erica. This is Matthew, my son. I live from Maysville.
Thank you. Welcome. Okay. Welcome to everyone visiting today. Please join us after the service for coffee hour. We'd love to have a chance to meet you, to get to know you better. I'll be there along with many of our members. In addition, our minister, Reverend Mike Walker, and our director of religious education, Steve Cooper, are present and will be happy to meet you. For those of you who are live streaming via YouTube, please be aware that during the time of sharing of joys and concerns, the live stream will go blank and will return after joys and concerns. Have you noticed that coffee in Creeves Hall can be crowded and maybe a little intimidating? Grab your cup of coffee and come down to the lower annex to meet other visitors and a couple of folks from the Congregational Life Committee. We can answer your questions you might have or just get to know you. Looking forward to seeing you there. Our service can be heard outside the glass doors and at the back of the sanctuary should anyone feel the need to step out of the service. As we begin our service, please silence all electronic devices. Thank you for joining us this morning.
For our opening words, I'm going to share with you a poem entitled One Love by my colleague in ministry, Hope Johnson. We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, here not by coincidence, but because we choose to journey together. We are active and proactive, we care deeply, we live our love as best we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing, and rejoicing. Getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, living our answers, learning to love our neighbors, learning to love ourselves, apologizing and forgiving with humility, and being forgiven through grace. Creating the beloved community together, we are one. May it ever be so, and blessed be you all. I'd like to invite up for the chalice lighting a couple of our younger members, Ben Marabali and Lulu Knight.
We light our chalice this morning for the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Invited to rise in body or in spirit as we join in singing the first three verses of We Are a Gentle, Angry People.
And now I invite you to join me while seated in speaking the affirmation by James Villa Blake. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you.
Our time together this morning is going to be a time of make-believe. I'd like you to put your imagination caps on so that we can pretend together. So raise your hand if you've ever been to a baseball game. And how many of you follow a team that you think of as your team? All right. Do we have any soccer players out here? Anybody that plays soccer? Number of kids? Do you have a team that you follow? Or just your own? Well, I have bad news. Here's the place where we pretend. I just received an advance copy of a statement that will be released tomorrow by J.B. Pritzker, our governor. Apparently, he's a big football fan and feels it is the fault of other sports that has caused a lack of people following his beloved Bears. And that's caused the team to not play very well. So this statement is being released tomorrow. It's very surprising. You won't believe what it says. Hear ye, all citizens of Illinois, effective immediately, are hereby notified that baseball and soccer are now illegal within our borders. From today onward, it is absolutely forbidden to watch baseball and soccer, play baseball or soccer, or go to a baseball or soccer game. You can't even stand in your backyard with a baseball and bat or kick around a soccer ball. If you must, buy a frisbee, or preferably a football. Don't ask why. We have reasons, and we mean it. No matter how old you are or which team that you are used to rooting for, you will be in huge trouble and go to jail for a long time if you watch or play baseball or soccer in the state of Illinois starting today. How do you feel about that? Baseball and soccer are going to be illegal. What are each of you going to do about it? Ignore it? You're not a baseball fan? Doug? Doug is going to find a loophole and listen to it on the radio because that was not listed. However, I'm sure there will be an amendment now. Glenn. What?
I know what this is really about, so I'm going to cheer for the Packers.
You're just going to cheer for the Packers. Oh. Anybody else have any ideas? What are you going to do? Is there anything that you can do as the people of Illinois? Yes, Carol.
I will boycott football.
Boycott football games. Yes. Rural. Move to another state. Yes. Vote. At some point, there's going to be obviously opposition to it, and you can vote. Protest.
Yeah, for people in family, they all have baseball bats. For other people, even then, not only are we going to be to not be able to arrest us all, they might not want to try it because we all have baseball bats.
We're going to go in front of the Capitol building with baseball bats. Yes, Caroline.
Well, those of us who are neither baseball nor soccer fans still have to take a position on this issue.
Are you going to be an ally?
I am going to be an ally.
All right.
Because I know and love baseball and football fans.
Good answer. RJ. So you're going to talk to Congress and the Senate and ask them to change it back, vote. Eli.
Ban football.
Or boycott football. Russ.
I'm going to inaugurate impeachment proceedings.
Was there a quid pro quo? So all those are possible ways to respond. And maybe this new law doesn't affect you, so you shrug it off. Maybe the threat of prison scares you enough to stop or to sneak around. Maybe you leave Illinois every time you want to hit a few balls or kick the ball around or watch a team play. This may sound like a funny example to talk about, but there are countries where doing simple, everyday things are forbidden. A lot of the time, those forbidden things have to do with speaking your mind or practicing your religion. Imagine you woke up tomorrow and found out that it was against the law to be a Unitarian Universalist or talk about Unitarian Universalism and the beliefs. That's a pickle that some of us, or some of our religious ancestors, faced. So nearly 500 years ago in Europe, people got tired of being told that there was only one way to practice religion. They began to read the Bible themselves, and they thought about it, which meant they started coming up with their own new religious beliefs. And a few of them were our religious ancestors. They were part of a movement called the Radical Reformation. And they talked about a new religious belief that we today would call Unitarian. These brave people began to practice being Unitarians even though it was forbidden. And they could get in a lot of trouble, and they did. Some of them said, I'll stop. It's not that important to me. I'll go along with what we're supposed to believe. Some of them said, I'll be a Unitarian in secret with people I trust. And in public, I'll pretend to go along with what I'm told. Some of them said, I'm out of here. And they left the places it was most dangerous to be a Unitarian and tried to find countries where it was safer to be Unitarian. A few of them said, nope, I'm going to be a Unitarian anyway and talk about my beliefs even if it gets me into trouble, because I can't deny my conscience and my faith. The truth is, we needed all those early Unitarians, the ones like Michael Servetus, who died because of his courage and his faith, the ones that fled to other countries, the ones who practiced and taught Unitarian beliefs in secret. And maybe we even needed the people who said, it's not that important, because they got to make a choice. You'll be happy to know that it is safe to play and watch baseball and soccer in Illinois. But I hope you're also happy to be a UU. Let's be grateful for the people throughout the past 500 years who made sure that we could inherit this faith and take care of it for the next generations. During the next hymn, after the first verse, the kids and youth will leave with me to go to class. Please stand in body or spirit as we sing together hymn number 168, One More Step.
On April 16, 1963, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too feel compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outsider, agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. You deplore the demonstrations that are presently taking place in Birmingham, but I am sorry that your statement did not express a similar concern for the conditions that brought the demonstrations into being. I am sure that each of you would want to go beyond the superficial social analyst who looks merely at effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. I would not hesitate to say that it is unfortunate that so-called demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham at this time, but I would say in more emphatic terms that it is even more unfortunate that the white power structure of this city left the Negro community with no other alternative. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 345 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers and sisters smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the despairing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so badly?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no hotel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes the N-word and your middle name becomes boy, no matter how old you are, and your last name becomes John. And when your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs., when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are presently misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation because the goal of America is justice. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson scratched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our foreparents labored here without wages. They made cotton king, and they built the homes of their masters in the midst of brutal injustice and shameful humiliation. And yet, out of a bottomless vitality, our people continue to thrive and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fall. We will win our freedom because our sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. May it ever be so.
I know that that reading from Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail was rather long. Believe it or not, that was not even close to the whole thing. I want to do something new. I've been talking with our pastoral ministry associates about how to make them more visible in our congregation. Our PMAs are people who have had some training and volunteer their time to be a listening presence here at church. So if somebody walks through our doors with a heavy heart and they need somebody to talk to, they can talk with one of our PMAs. And so every time we have joys and concerns, I'm going to introduce the PMA on duty that day. So today, Mary Hamill is working with us, and notice the lovely scarf. This is a new thing. All of our PMAs will be wearing a scarf that looks just like that. Thank you. And now, let us do as we often do a couple of times a month, take some time publicly to share with each other the great joys and sorrows in your personal lives. If you have such a joy or sorrow that you wish to share, You are invited to come forward to the microphone now. That sometimes people bring with them joys or even sorrows that are yet to tend. Loud or not, let us take a moment of silence to hold all of the joys and sorrows in this room in our hearts so that our friends do not carry them alone.
Thank you. Our next excerpts from activists of color are from contemporary activists. Ijeoma Oluo is a Seattle-based writer, speaker, and activist. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and The Guardian, and she is the recipient of the 2018 Feminist Humanist Award by the American Humanist Society. In the opening chapter of her New York Times best-selling book, So You Want to Talk About Race, which I recommend, she recounts a conversation she had with a friend who believed that the liberal cause would get further if it focused more on issues of class than race. She writes, "I live in a world where if I have a black-sounding name, I'm less likely to even be called for a job interview. Will I equally benefit from raising minimum wages when I might not even get a job?" My friend recalls that study, acknowledging that the discrimination I'm referencing is a real thing that happens. And if I do get a job and do what society says that I should do and save up and buy a house, will I benefit equally when the fact that I live in a black neighborhood means that my house will be worth far less? Will I benefit equally when I'm much more likely to get higher mortgage rates from a bank or predatory bank loans that will skyrocket in cost after a few years, causing me to foreclose and lose my home and equity and credit because of the color of my skin? I'm on a coffee and frustration-fueled roll now. If I am able to get what is considered a decent wage for the average American, but my son is locked up in jail like 1 in 3 black men are predicted to be, and so I'm taking care of my grandkids on my meager salary, will stronger unions really raise me up out of poverty? If I'm more likely to be suspended and expelled from school because ever since preschool, my teachers are more likely to see my childhood antics as violence and aggression, will a reduction in student loan costs help me when I was pushed out of education before completing high school? And I'm ranting now. I'm talking fast to get it all out, not because I'm angry, because I'm not really. I know it's not my friend's fault that what he's saying is the prevailing narrative and that it's seen as the compassionate narrative. But it's a narrative that hurts me and so many other people of color. My friend pauses and says, "Well, what are we supposed to do then? Nothing? Can't we focus on this class stuff first to get everybody behind it and then address the race stuff afterwards?" To which I sigh and say, that's the promise that's been made to us for hundreds of years. Those are the words of every labor movement that managed to help white America so much more than everyone else. Those are the words that move everybody forward, but in the exact same place, with the exact same hierarchy, with the exact same oppressions. Those words are why the wealth gap between whites and blacks is just as bad as it was when Dr. King was leading marches. We're still waiting. We're still hoping. We're still left behind. Rachel Cargill is a nationally known public academic, activist, writer, and lecturer on the intersection of race and feminism. Her 2018 opinion piece in Harper's Bazaar, titled "When Feminism is White Supremacy in Heels," is widely read, so widely read that now she writes a monthly column for the magazine. Here are her words. "When I heard about the tragic murder of 18-year-old Nia Wilson, who was stabbed to death in an unprovoked attack in Oakland last month, I could feel my heart begin to bleed. My community of black women was grieving yet again. And as we grappled with the realities of Nia's death, I began to use Instagram to facilitate a discussion and flesh out questions like, how many more black women and girls must die before the mainstream media considers it a worthy story to cover? How could they possibly take away her white male murderer so gently in handcuffs while black men are thrown to the ground during traffic stops? Why aren't the recorded wails of her mother and the tears of her father enough for the whole world to be demanding justice right now? And where are the voices of all my white feminist friends when a black woman had been tragically murdered? Almost immediately, at my request, hundreds of commenters asked the white women who they saw as friends and leaders to use their platforms to highlight the tragedy of Nia's death with the same outrage of their black feminist allies. And many did. But there were just as many white women whose bios claimed titles like social justice warrior and intersectional feminist, that somehow took this call for solidarity as a personal attack. Instead of sharing in the outrage of Nia's brutal murder, they came with fury for being tagged in a post that they felt challenged their own perceived feminist accomplishments. There were grand displays of defensiveness, demands that they be acknowledged for the things that they had done for black people in the past, and a terrifying lashing out that included racial slurs and doxing. The fragility of these women was not a surprise to me. It is the type of behavior that rests under the guise of feminism only as long as it is comfortable, only as long as it is personally rewarding, only as long as it keeps on brand. But if the history of this movement taught us anything, it is that intersectionality and feminism is vital. We cannot forget the ways that suffragettes dismissed the voices of black women, sending them to the backs of their marches, only for black activists like Ida B. Wells and Anna Julia Cooper to make major moves while fighting for the vote in tandem with their fight for rights as black people, ultimately shifting the shape of this entire country. If there is not the intentional and action-based inclusion of women of color, then feminism is simply white supremacy in heels. As these things play out over and over again, it is made painfully obvious that many white women believe that the worst thing that can happen to them is to be called a racist. Let me be clear, it is not. Seeing your child gunned down in the street by the police unjustly is much worse. Being turned away from medical care due to race and underlying biases by medical staff resulting in death is much worse. Being harassed by authorities only to be charged yourself instead is much worse. So what does allyship actually look like? It looks like accepting the reality of this country's racial dynamics. White skin yields white privilege, and an ally is willing to use their privilege to fight with or for those who are marginalized. Allyship means voting for elected officials who have a track record of ensuring the most marginalized among us are heard and are advocated for. Allyship means using your sphere of influence, whether it be your dining room table or the boardroom of your company, to call out racist actions and ideals. Allyship means uplifting the voices and experiences of people of color so that we are not continuously drowned out and ignored. What makes allyship so hard for most? Many liberal white women have an immediate reaction of defense when someone challenges their intentions. And it is in that precise moment that they need to stop and realize that they are actually part of the problem. It's never the offender who gets to decide when they've offended someone. If you feel yourself dismissing the words or experiences of people of color because you think they're overreacting, or because you didn't know, or because it has nothing to do with race, it's often due to your ego and not your rationale. Listen and learn instead.
There are many reasons why people come to this church. Today we're talking about justice, and one reason that many people come to our UU churches throughout the country is because they tend to be incubators for activists, people who go out into the community, out into the world, and bring our values to the town square to speak for justice, to speak for equity, to speak for compassion. The way our churches are able to keep on doing this work, keep on being incubators, is through the support of our members and friends. If you are here for the first time, we invite you to let the offering bowl pass you by. And if you've made this your spiritual home, we thank you for your ongoing generosity. This morning's offering will now be received. Thank you. Many churches across the country are observing Martin Luther King Day today. As many of my colleagues have been recently discussing their plans online, I was struck by something many have been contemplating, and that is, it's not all that helpful right now to preach about Dr. King's life. Rather, many have decided to preach how MLK would preach, bringing some of the concerns he lifted up into the present day. After all, when we think about it, aren't some of his concerns also some of ours? So I shall try to do a little of both. But when we think of this work continuing, let us remember that Dr. King spoke of racial inequality in society. He spoke against white supremacy and the KKK. He pointed out inequities in housing, employment, and justice when comparing how black and white people are treated. He spoke about a dream he had for his children. I look at all those things that Dr. King and so many others worked for, and I realize that for all the progress that has been made, it has not been enough. And in fact, in some instances, one might argue that society has actually regressed. We often hear excerpts from the I Have a Dream speech that is beautiful and aspirational, while also challenging society to make a change. It has been less often that I've heard the words of Dr. King when he was beset by frustration and exasperation. I imagine if he were to see the world as it is today, still with many of the same issues he spoke against, he would be frustrated. So I thought today I would explore his letter from Birmingham jail, particularly as it still points to what we are seeing in society today. Dr. King and others involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were called to Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 to peacefully and nonviolently demonstrate for the end of racial segregation in society and institutional racism. In this time and place, places still were labeled whites only, or less often labeled for colored people. These were cafes and water fountains, public restrooms, movie theaters, all kinds of businesses and schools, churches, and even whole neighborhoods. So people had had enough, and they planned a demonstration to pressure the local government to make changes in law for the just treatment of all people. But as you may already know, many involved in the demonstration were arrested because they did not have a parade permit. A permit which, of course, would never have been issued to an organization deemed black or sympathizers of the same. So they demonstrated without a permit. While he was sitting in a jail cell, someone brought Dr. King a newspaper that contained an open letter written by 8 white religious leaders. It's a bit horrifying to me to realize that these would have been my colleagues and peers had I been in ministry in that place and time. These pastors, like others in other cities and throughout the South during the Civil Rights era, wrote that they wished outsiders would not come to their city stirring up trouble, and made the prediction that justice and equality would come when it was time, and that no one really needed to protest about it. Just let time take its supposedly natural course, they said. This was a time in which elected leaders in Alabama were all whites. In fact, in some counties in Alabama in the early 60s, there were no black registered voters, even if they were the majority of the residents of said counties. It was due to this context that Dr. King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference members, and so many others marched. At this demonstration, like so many others, and as he wrote in his letter from jail, he reminded us that rights have never been granted to an oppressed class without them demanding it, that change did not come to society without many people working to make it change, that freedom was won through action, not inaction, by speaking up and not staying silent. His letter was largely aimed at white moderates, including elected and religious leaders all across this country, and not just the 8 that wrote the letter in the newspaper. Dr. King said to all who would listen, "I must confess that over the last few years I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that our great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in your goal, but I can't agree with you in your methods,' who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another person's freedom, and who constantly advises us to wait for a more convenient season." He said, "Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will." It feels, at least it feels to me, as if he is speaking today. I could well have imagined those words at a prayer vigil in Charlottesville at our southern border, or perhaps spoken through a megaphone outside the White House right now. And why not? The message he shared seems timeless, regrettably in part because some things have not changed, even if we thought they had. Or they did change for the better for a while, but now it feels to some of us like our society is backsliding, and we wish that to stop. But if we want to do something about it, I think we need to join hands with a great many other people. We will not solve the problems of the world if we never look beyond our own provincial concerns or local problems. In his letter, Dr. King also espoused some theology that will seem very familiar to Unitarian Universalists. He wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Those words bring to mind a couple of our UU principles, especially the one that recognizes the interdependency of all people. For his words, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," I cannot help but thinking of our metaphorical interdependent web, in which movement on this side of the web sends vibrations that are felt everywhere on the web. So it is with our world, our country, our society. When injustice is seen or felt somewhere, at some point that will come to us as well. We will become aware of it. We will sense it. We may become alarmed by it. And what then? What do we do when we become aware of injustice somewhere? The young African American child scared by police, running and then gunned down. Or children being separated from parents, refugees of violence who come to our borders seeking safety and assistance. But safety and assistance are not what they are finding at our border now. What about the various efforts at voter suppression throughout the southern states? We thought that was a relic of the 1960s and earlier, right? Yet it is happening today. You might think that's far from here, and maybe it doesn't affect anyone that you or I know personally. So do we need to really do anything? I mean, it's not like it's contagious, right? It would never spread to other states. Voter suppression could never find its way to Illinois. Or could it? A medical aphorism states that it is easier to treat a disease if we catch it early and prevent it from spreading. I suggest that is also true for injustice. Let's stop the spread before the problem gets worse. If I may be so bold as to say, I believe this is our calling in the 21st century as Unitarian Universalists. It is not enough to sit in complacency and comfort if there are our fellow human beings who live under oppression, who are hungry or cold, who are scared children taken from their parents' arms, who are people of color who still find themselves treated as second-class citizens or worse. I take his meaning when Dr. King says that the well-meaning moderate who slows down the process for their own comfort is less helpful, more frustrating than the bigoted people who aren't even trying to understand others different than themselves. Let us be allies that show up, that speak up, that join with others in need wherever and whenever that may be. Peace and justice are our cry. May it ever be so. And blessed be you all. Our closing hymn is the last three verses of We Are a Gentle, Angry People, and you are invited to rise in body or in spirit. In benediction, this is a prayer for living intention by my colleague and friend, Joe Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Blessed be, and go now in peace.